So keep that out of it,
So keep that in there.
because we're gonna, you know, we're debating the unknown, not the.
And not that, I don't know, so this takes that out of it. So this-
Almost there. I got a second.
All right, we are live on YouTube. It is 7:08 PM on February 9th, 2023. Thank you for bearing with us as we got the technical issues straightened out. We'll call to order this regular meeting of the Reading Board of Education for February 9th. Present in person are myself, Chris Parkin, Mike Hoffman, Sherrod Sedana, and John Belfato. Joining us remotely are John Shanahan, Laura Gibbons, and Stephanie Fulton. First item of business is public comment. Any members of the public wishing to be heard? Hearing none, we'll move to board member comment, but before we do that, I want to give Dr. McKinnon an opportunity to address the events of the day at John Reed.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming and for tuning in at home. This afternoon, we dismissed John Reed Middle School at approximately 1 PM. We notified families at approximately 12:30 PM that we needed to dismiss because students had detected an odor in the building down near the 6th grade wing. At the time, we didn't know what caused this odor. And so out of an abundance of caution, the administration at the building evacuated the building. There were some students that did not feel well, approximately 12 to 15 students who had headaches, who felt, who kind of had symptoms related to feeling dizzy and so on. And so it was a precaution that we evacuated the building. When we evacuated the building, we had first responders on scene, and first responders, including paramedics, firefighters, and police. And firefighters have tools in which they can detect carbon monoxide and other gases as part of their regular duties and responsibilities. Those tools did not detect any of the typical gases that we're mostly worried about. And so throughout the afternoon, I was sending updates to families, which basically said, we have evacuated the building, dismissal will occur at 1 PM. Parents were coming to the school to pick up their students, and students were being sent home. There was another update provided probably a couple of hours later, or maybe an hour to 2 hours later. And we had more equipment come through the building, which also tested the building as well. And still, we did not find any evidence of what caused the odor. And then later in the afternoon, CT Deep arrived, and they have much more sophisticated equipment, which one device in particular was a portable gas mass spectrometer. And that was able to really look at all phases of matter, liquid, solid, vapor, and so on. And they detected a compound which we believe caused the odor. And we also believed it was then safe for students to come and staff to come back in the building. Obviously, students were dismissed at that time. Further research, we invited in the Department of Health and a representative whose responsibility is a chemical safety engineer to work with CT Deep to analyze the results and to kind of help us understand where this odor or this compound came from. And it's a compound that's commonly found in aerosol sprays, deodorants, air fresheners, could also be used in pepper spray. And so we don't know as of yet where this compound came from. It did seem to travel. In other words, it was down in 1 or 2 classrooms, but later it was in the gym. So we actually felt that it may have been on someone's clothing as well. And so there was some speculation that it was pepper spray that was found. So there was a communication that was sent out to families at approximately 6 PM, where the information stated that the building is clear. We could have this meeting tonight with the Board of Education, that school can resume tomorrow, students were invited to come to school to pick up their belongings. And everyone can come safely back to school tomorrow per usual. Following this event, we plan to fully debrief and look at our procedures around communication and dismissal, and to learn as much as we can. I'd like to thank all the teachers and staff who evacuated the school and got the students home safely. Mr. Maris and Mrs. Dunn they have contacted all families who felt ill today. Those families were evaluated on site by medical staff. No family went to the hospital. They were all released and all families went home. And so we've called each of those families tonight as well. And so far everyone's well. Like I said, the next 48 hours, we're going to debrief today and see if we can learn anything about our dismissal procedures, where parents came to pick up students when they came, where buses picked up students, where the students were located. All of those logistical things we'll take a deep dive into. And we also will invite members of our first responder team to come, and we'll get insights as to them as well. They established a command post in the front of the school. There was really good communication between our first responders and school administration. There was the Office of Emergency Management in Danbury who were on scene, and we kind of talked about where everyone was going to be and what was happening and so on. So I think over the next 24 to 48 hours, we'll have more information. We'll be able to provide the board with kind of an update on our procedures, and we'll provide an update to parents as well. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions, Ray? Thank you.
Okay. So
On to any board member comments. There's not, we'll move right on to discussion of possible action, the 2023-2024 operating capital budgets. And I understand Dr. McKinnon has some updates for us from our conversation on Tuesday.
Do I need to share my screen, Chris? Yes, probably, right? With the Zoom?
Yeah, we're not seeing anything.
Okay, stand by.
Wrong share.
Yeah, you're in
In Zoom, yeah.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At our Tuesday meeting, we had really 3 to 4 areas to look at and to come back and provide information to the board tonight. These were the areas to look at health insurance, to look at additional use of paying fair funds this year, to look at our our 6th through 8 math program, to discuss whether we needed a 5th or a 6th section of, and to also discuss some more expenditures that were opportunities for savings in the budget request. So Ms. Grafani, our Director of Finance and Operations, and Mr. Parkin had a very detailed analysis conversations over the last 48 hours. And we're pleased to announce that we've made the following cuts in those areas. Maintenance equipment, $32,000 was reduced to $2,500 and renamed maintenance supplies. RES books instructional text was $34,098, was reduced to $20,505. Some text will be purchased this year from unused accounts, for example, conference and travel. PPS technology was reduced to $600 from the repair and the service of equipment. So that's some reductions that we made there. You'll see that in our kind of reduction sandbox in a moment. And if you recall, we talked a little bit about class size at Tuesday's meeting. And we reported class size in neighbouring districts, including Easton and Reading, Newtown, Ridgefield, Southbury, and Middlebury, Region 15, Wilton, Westport, Greenwich, and Weston, and of course Bethel, Brookfield, and so on. And you can see that in the blue bar, what the typical K-1 class size represents, what the typical class size represents in grades 2 and 3, and then class sizes in grades 4 and 5. And right now, class sizes in Eastern and Reading are comparatively low to other districts. I think we're doing well in those areas. However, at the last meeting, we budgeted 5 sections for about 75 kindergarten students. And Ms. Labrosciano noted that that number has since climbed. And now we're in the what we expect to be in the mid-80s by the time we have kindergarten in next year in fall. So we looked at the kindergarten enrollment details, and we learned that we didn't really send out packets and receive packets, but we do have a very detailed spreadsheet which identifies students we expect to be here next year. And in summary, after looking at all that data over the past 24 hours, you can see here that we will probably have a range between 85 to 90 students in kindergarten next year. So let's split the difference and identify 88 students at the benchmark. If we have 88 students and 5 sections, that's approximately 17.6 students in a classroom. And if we increase a section to 6 sections at the same 88 students, we'd have about 14.6 students in the classroom. So I think we can return to that kind of once we get into the sandbox, and you can talk about kind of where we are on the budget. You can hear from Ms. Labrosciano as well, and we can discuss the option. But essentially, if we are at 88 students in kindergarten, and which I believe we will be somewhere between 85 to 90, then it's anywhere from 5 sections at 17 students or 6 sections at 14.6 students. I'm going to skip the health insurance portion.
Do you want us to wait till the end to ask questions, or we can section by section?
I think we could probably get into the sandbox, which we adjusted today, and if you can see that here, then we've already agreed to the checkboxes in column D. So we modified healthcare from 12.5% to 8%. Reduced the nurse, reduced the 1.0 custodian request to a 0.5. We factored in their times 3, 15,000 times 3, which is 45,000. There was a request for 2 special education teachers. We removed 1 special education teacher. We're funding 1 with IDEA. The reductions that I mentioned at the beginning of the slide totaled about 48,000. So those reductions have been added into our budget reduction calculator. And then you see the Kubota and Vera. There was actually, the value here is 17,000. We actually have 6 Vera payments at 17,000, totaling a little bit over $102,000. However, we only put 3 Veras in there. I'll explain why in a moment. The math textbooks at $45,000, and then adding a 6th section of kindergarten, you can see what the change is there. What you see highlighted in green represents approximately 157,000. So the 3 Veras, the Kubota, the 3 Veras at 15,000, the 3 Veras at 17,000, and the textbooks in green add up to about 157,000. So Ms. Scribani would have to find 157,000 in unexpended funds this year to prepay some of those items. You can see over on the right-hand side in that orange area, if we added a 6th section of kindergarten, we would budget about $68,000, which would include a part-time paraprofessional, which would total $83,973. You can see in column I, the various reductions leading down to row 26. Theoretically, we could get the budget down to 3.47 with those reductions. But if we added the 6th section of kindergarten, the budget would go back up to 3.83. And the current budget right now in our spreadsheet is this right, Sarah? 3.80.
That's 3.0.
3.80.
Check out something else that we should
Because where does 3.80 live in all this? Then I see 3.94 is where we're living.
So Sarah, sort that out, and why don't we take questions?
How confident are you on the 85 to 90?
We are very confident on the 85 to 90. However, I'll be honest, we have mixed feelings about whether we need 5 sections or 6 sections of kindergarten. Melissa can talk to this, but you know, you saw the average of the school districts around us. Having 17, 18 students in kindergarten is a pretty normal benchmark. Now, ideally, I think we should be around 15, 16, but 17 students is not. Certainly, it's kind of the normal benchmark of the surrounding towns. What you could do is add the 6th section. You can see what the change in the budget would be, and we could watch that the growth of the number of students in kindergarten over the next month. We could always take the section out. It's much harder to add it further down the line. So I think that is that. You know, I talked about this on Tuesday night. That's the community dial that you want to turn, right? Where do you want to modulate that? And it's the difference between having 14 students in a class and 17 students in a class, right?
But what would happen, say we didn't budget for it, and we ended up with 95 kids this summer, so you know, people move in during the summer or something else happens. Then we just stop, because it's almost impossible to hire someone that late, right?
It's easier to hire classroom teachers in a Fairgate school district that are kindergarten, 1st grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade teachers. Because I think our school system is pretty attractive, and so I think we posted the position, we get some good candidates. More difficult to find an 8th grade math teacher, a physics teacher, a chemistry teacher, and so on. But generally speaking, we've had success in finding some quality classroom teachers.
It's harder to do from a funding perspective because you're starting the fiscal year by telling the finance director, by the way, you need to find $90,000 of breakage.
Why the mixed opinion? You said there's mixed feelings about adding this section or not.
You know, I was a building principal for 10 years, and I've seen both. You know, I've seen class sizes 15, 16, 17 in kindergarten and 1st grade. I've seen them slightly above that. And sometimes it has to do with the makeup of the students themselves in the class. A little bit more difficult to pin down in kindergarten because these students aren't here yet, right? Some of them are in our pre-K program.
It's in the uncomfortable spot where 14 feels low and 18, 19 feels high.
Yeah,
And the number that we're dividing just creates that difficult choice. For context, Gerard, going back 6-ish years, maybe, Stephanie will help me remember, we had kindergartens in the 21, 22 range. And it was the source of a lot of discontent in the kindergarten community, particularly because As we know, those rooms don't have doors and they have partial partitions and it's a lot of bodies and a lot of noise in that little area, with 20 plus. We're not talking about 20 plus here, but the question I'd have is whether 85 to 90 is a fully loaded projection based on all reasonable expectations, including the likelihood of adding a few bodies over the summer, or whether 85 to 90 is without having that conversation. Well, every year we probably pick up a couple, because at 17, I don't have a huge problem. If we pick up 12 kids over the summer that are unaccounted for, now we're in the 18s, 19s very quickly, and that's where we start running into that friction. So,
The unaccounted for are the variables of people moving into the.
And out.
Right.
And out. No.
And so that's hard, that's why it's when you say like, how can you go either way, that's where it's like, ooh, one number does seem kind of low, and one is like the tipping scale of what if we get an influx.
right, because
The other thing to keep in mind is that the kindergarten classrooms, the kindergarten program includes paraprofessionals that are there for.
Two adults and
a
every
portion of
class.
the day. Yeah, they're not there the entire day, but a good portion of the day, whereas your first grade classrooms, of course, do not have.
Is there space for an additional class in that hall?
Yes.
There's sometimes more than two adults at the front. You know, when I've been on tours, there's the the kindergarten teacher, the paraprofessional, and possibly special ed in there. Yep. And when we look at 18 on the graph, we don't know if there's two in every classroom there, but we know there's two in every classroom here. So if there's one in every classroom and most of those districts seem to go with 18, and we have two in the classroom at 17, I think that sounds pretty good.
I think the risk of committing to a sixth section is that you miss low, like we missed low this year. And if you go 6 divided by 72, now we've got 11 and 12 kids in the class, and are we ripping somebody after we offer them the contracts?
So that's the question, if we end up lower than expected, can we do 5?
You're reassigning a teacher at that point.
Right.
Well, we could put it in the budget as 6, but not post it or hire for it until much later.
Wait
Right,
till
until
June.
it's a hard.
Exactly.
When's the deadline for kindergarten application or
There
registration?
isn't.
The other.
You show up, you're involved.
Well, after the year begins.
I would say that, usually in the end of May, we have the big kindergarten orientation where all the registered families come in. So we really do a really big push for around the end of May to determine these are all the big chunk of numbers of kids that are planning on attending. I will say that over the next month, probably in March, we do another push of all the families that we haven't heard from in a little while to be, to ask, where are you in the process? But by end of May, we have a really good idea because that's when all the families come in typically to visit.
It feels to me more likely than not that we would be okay at 5. But I'm also conscious of the difficulty of going the other way, of saying, now I need to add it and to add the funds. So let's ask a different hypothetical question, which I think goes along with Chirag's line of thinking, which is, say we budget this, and we talked about it being budgeted as a flex staff member kind of, it was gonna be the special educator, and we can use this money instead of the IDA grant, and we can save that money, for example. Like, are there other options for using this as far as areas of staff need that we're not accounting for?
Well, I think that's a perfect example. Special ed director requested 2 special ed teachers. We cut one, basically when she left the room on Tuesday night. And we funded one through the IDEA grant. So,
Is there a benefit to saying that we would fund that special educator? If we funded this additional $80,000 and we don't need it, can we apply that $80,000 to the special educator instead of using grant money and hold the IDEA grant money because it's a 2-year rolling window? And apply it to something
Or
else,
add a second special.
or as a special educator.
Because that need is also still kind of unknown, right? That was part of.
right.
So I think having this spot makes, however we want to frame it, a lot of sense to have a budget for a teacher, whether that ends up being.
And we could end up needing neither, But, if you can preserve the grant money, you're still preserving the grant money.
Yeah. So if we end up needing neither, then we preserve the grant money. So that's sort of the order of operations. We need a kindergarten teacher, that's the first priority. If we don't need a kindergarten teacher, special ed teacher, if we don't need a second special ed teacher.
And then that first special educator that right now is IDA grant funded, if you ended up funding it out of budget because of this, next year you fund it out of the grant and you still maintain that continuity. I don't know.
If it's budgeted on the low side and we find out that we do need that extra class, then we want to go to the town and say we need to fund this and.
You could, that's one way you can do it. The reality is gonna be that they tell you to go find it.
It's happened, that's happened before, if I remember correctly, we had a couple of retirements in the meantime, and so there was a difference in salary between the veteran, teacher, and, I mean, lots of things happen over the summer, right? But those couple of retirements almost funded it, do you remember that? Might be
I
like,
know 3-ish years ago, in the middle of, when we were reopening for COVID, there was an issue in, it was the 3rd grade at the time. We added a teacher in August.
yeah, it's not that one, I'm
Labeled.
thinking of specific, specific situation in kindergarten where we found.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be funded at some point, somewhere, somehow. It's not like it's not gonna happen.
But it could be, if there's no breakage or something like that, it could be at the expense of something else.
If the wall was flat, going to the trouble.
No, assuming that you're gonna have enough breakage to cover that cost, I think, it's a less likely that versus. Cause you know, the way the cash flow works anyway, if the teacher's not used, we don't use that fund, it stays with, like, it doesn't get expensed from the town anyway. It's not like they give us the money or the school.
Right, if we don't
anyway.
hire the teacher.
You don't hire the
we don't
teacher, the town
Post
doesn't
the
spend it.
position and hire until we are sure that the number is firm. Then.
Well, that's
the
fine,
money's
you could
still-
budget for it and change it, but.
Right. But I think the more prudent approach.
Killing me.
Well, I worked I worked on budgets for a very long time when I was working in the restaurant business. And all managers used to budget what they had last year plus, so that but they spend or not, just so that they would get it the next year. And that's not the way I think it should be handled,
But that's not how we're handling it.
or in a way it is.
Why? We're budgeting based on projected need.
You're still adding that extra class that is typically, well, we're saying is probably not necessary.
We're not adding the class, we're adding a position with the expectation that it will either be needed because demand in kindergarten requires it. And if demand in kindergarten doesn't require it, we can allocate it to a position that's currently grant funded to preserve that grant funding. Or option 3, we could take the $83,000, park it and say, we're just not gonna use it because we don't need it.
And by us not using it, it stays with the town.
I would just prefer to do a more above board thing than usual.
What's below board about this?
It just seems that way.
In what way is this? This is extraordinarily transparent.
Well, I'm not saying that it's, maybe I used the wrong choice of words. I would just do a cleaner one and just budget for what we expect and leave it at that.
But that is kind of what we're doing. The expectation is it's gonna be 85 to 90 kids. And so now we're saying, okay, there's unknown on special ed. We're expecting 85 to 90 kids in kindergarten. So that's the cleanest thing to do is budget for it.
In my opinion, I don't think either of them are needed, but that's my opinion.
So it's, I think it's really a decision between 14 and 17. That's, to me, that's the difference. Are you gonna, go with the 85 to 90 and be happy with the 17 with 2 adults in the classroom? Or you're gonna go for the 14 and potentially end up with 12?
I don't know that that's the choice entirely for a lot of the same reasons that we're talking about what the future holds and what the speculation is. If you're telling me we're gonna have 5 sections of 17 kids in kindergarten tomorrow, I'm signing for that right now. Good to go. But what we don't know is whether the projection right now of I am confident we've got 17 per section. I don't know what's coming in the next 6 months. That's what gives me pause about the push on the high side. I think it's more likely than not that we're fine at 5.
But if it does end up where it would be 14, we're probably just gonna say, okay, keep it at 5 and use the funds for either.
Depends on when we figure out that it is gonna be 85 to 90, right?
I think if you're
Because if
sitting
we've
here on
already hired, then.
If we're sitting here on June 15th, and on June 15th, we're still at 75 kids. nobody's hiring anybody. If on June 15th, we're at 93 kids,
we can
we're saying
delay.
we're hiring someone.
We can delay actually hiring.
Yeah, this is certainly
It's
not.
not a shortage area.
Can I make a suggestion? I think someone has already said this, but I'm a little confused now, so I'll just say it again. What if we fund the special education teacher without the IDEA grant and hold that for the following year? And then if we do get a higher number of kindergartners, that puts us up into 19, 20 or whatever, then we can use the IDEA grant for the special education teacher and fund the kindergarten teacher.
What if we land in a bucket where we end up needing a kindergarten teacher and a second special ed teacher?
Well, we already got the second, the
Yeah.
second special ed teacher, I think, is off the table. I kind of like Laura's thinking here because it allows us to say, we're preserving our grant, we're funding a teacher that we know that we're committed to hiring, which is special educator 1. And in the event that we actually need the kindergarten teacher, we can use that money that was allocated for special educator to hire a kindergarten teacher. Because that's not grant tied, and then we can apply the grant to the special educator salary. And then all we're out really is the difference on the part-time para, the 15,000, which is a lot easier to ask Sarah to go find than the 90,000.
And what happens if next year, the year after next year, enrollment drops? And you went ahead with a 6-session class,
We
You
reduce
reduce
it.
the section,
and where would that teacher go?
they'd be rest, last in, first out.
Oh, they can.
Yeah. So if we went with Laura's idea and we added that FTE, then your budget would be 3.62%, and then you've covered all your bases. And it's 3.62%. You're coming in, according to my colleagues in surrounding districts, in a very strong position. That's a very good budget to bring forward to the town. Because we have many school districts in the 4s and 5s right now. And I think 3.62 is a good position. What I did here, so you can see, here would be adding the kindergarten teacher at 83,973 in the para. I essentially took the price of a special education teacher. If I change this to 68,399, you'll see it'll go from 3.69 to 3.62. And I would change this as, adding, or you can call it whatever you want, recalling the special ed teacher, FTE.
Reclassify, whatever it is, right?
Yes.
The flexible FTE, basically.
And then I would, over here, I would remove this J23, I would remove the designation from the grant.
Right, you're just removing it entirely, it's just a cut.
I like that approach.
Is the grant a 1-year thing? This is something that happens every
It's a
year?
rolling 2 years.
Rolling 2 years, meaning that we know it's gonna be available this coming year and the year after that?
Yes, so you're always in year
Always
2
in.
of one grant and year 1 of the next. So it
And then-
continues to run on an annual basis.
Yeah. And so.
You get, the decision is, you get $200,000 in the grant. And that $200,000 is spread out over 2 years.
Yeah.
And the sliding scale is the percentage of how much you use of that $200,000 in year 1 and year 2. But the following year, you get another 200,000, and then you can make the same decision. I think there's a rule. There's a rule about how much of the percentage you can use in year 1 and year 2. And you've got to use a certain amount in year 1, a certain amount in
You
year
can't
2.
have 400 every 4 years. Like,
Right. Yeah, but
I just want to make sure that if we decide to hold the grant money aside for next year, it doesn't cost us to lose anything in future years.
Right.
Would it?
I think it would just preserve opportunity.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you could take that fund and could apply it towards a beat, you know, a behavior tech or speech and language or occupational
Special
occupational
education,
therapy,
soul
special
training.
education teacher.
Testing.
Yeah, you could actually, you've got a lot of flexibility in how you can use it, and in turn would lower operation costs. That's almost, you know, putting those funds in the piggy bank to use in a different way.
Were there other items, because we had talked about the math, program, were there other educational programs that we thought we could get more bang for our buck by paying for this year?
I had a number of ideas, but my colleagues and I sat down and we prioritized the math textbooks as what survived.
If it were up to me, I would put the math textbooks in the green light category right now, even if we temporarily take the 15 at 3 verbs off, swap those 45,000. Because if we're gonna talk about $45,000 of the current year funds, I'd rather be getting the math textbooks in our faculty's hands in the spring, so they can be doing professional learning right through the summer, as opposed to paying retired teachers a few months early.
Yeah.
If it's $45,000 either way, that's how I'd rather find it.
Well, yeah, and I was asking for not to swap it out versus, is there other opportunities where we're using that value?
Yeah, I'm saying as a first step, I would start that, and that seems to be a no-brainer.
But yeah, I mean, 3.62 is, I think, a good number, given everything else and inflation and the cost of healthcare.
I'm fine with the number 2, but I apologize if I missed this. Why do we need that textbook?
The middle school math program, so I did a presentation.
That's the one that's changing.
That's the
right?
one we talked about, right? We're doing a math textbook review right now.
We don't know which one, but we know. we're
We don't
gonna
know which one. That's a high estimate. That's the most that we
So it's a
anticipate
placeholder.
spending. We could select a textbook. And once it's approved by the board, that could be a lower figure. We might also need, slightly less to begin the professional development.
And
Didn't you say though that you were also reviewing them and putting forth, a form to prolong it?
You're thinking about the reading,
That's reading.
it's the elementary reading waiver,
Okay.
yes.
and the reason that it makes a lot of sense to pay for the math textbooks now is that the teachers can get trained in the spring.
I understand that. Yeah.
And Sarah, the other question I have is, when we said need to find 157, we're comfortable with that.
So here's where that, so the answer is yes. So that comes from a lot of little areas, but the big one is transportation. So remember that we budgeted that even though transportation costs and fuel costs have gone up, our overall percentage in transportation did not go up because we actually eliminated the bus, but the bus was kept in. That's where that money's coming from. In most of it.
So a bus run we didn't actually pay for this year.
Correct. That's where that is.
But it sounds like we're all fairly comfortable with the 3.62. Looking at Mike.
There's a half point in there that's not, in my opinion, is not real. Take those two variables, put them together, it's pretty much a, 0.5%. It's not in this year's budget. We're getting ready to pose it. It's not in next year's budget. It's just kind of somewhere in between. But it's money that's being spent. So from a transparency standpoint, I don't love pulling that forward. The math textbooks, we're pulling it forward, but there's a narrative behind it. But with the VERA, we're pulling it forward just because it gets our number down. But we're still kind of like, hey, look, it's a 3.62, but we're still taking the half point out of the taxpayer's pocket.
But I think
We're taking a half point out of the taxpayer's pocket.
what he's saying is
We're 45,000 plus 51,000 divided by 22 million is about a half a point.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not in this year's budget. We're taking it out of next year's budget, but we're still gonna pay it.
we're gonna pay it
Right,
from
because-
this year's money.
Because
This year's money, this wasn't something that we debated last year, it wasn't something we voted on last year. We're just kind of pulling it forward, paying it, and making it disappear later on with that.
Oh, it's an obligation that we have to pay, right?
You're not gonna convince me it's not in between the two budgets. We did not debate this. We did not approve this for this year's budget. We did not approve that 96,000 in this year's budget. You're taking it here out of next year's budget, so it doesn't exist in any budget. So it's kind of in between there, and you're saying, you take it out, drops it by a half point, it's really a 4.12, right? But you're saying it's a 3.62, but let me just grab this $96,000 over here, and I'm gonna pay this off early. You don't see
I
that?
can make the same argument I can make the same argument going back 2 years when we overran health insurance by hundreds of thousands of dollars. That money wasn't a need to budget, but we paid it out of that year's budget. Because we didn't have a choice.
This is predictable, that's unpredictable, and we have a health insurance reserve for that reason.
From the taxpayer's perspective, though, aren't we just removing a burden from them by, like, if I'm the taxpayer and I don't see this in the budget anywhere, I mean, that's a good thing for me.
We're also reducing.
Hiding it is a good thing for
You're
you.
paying an obligation. Who's hiding it? It's on the screen, Ron. You.
Yeah,
I-
it's essentially sitting, it's sitting on a balance sheet. It's sitting somewhere and it's gonna be paid now or later. I just pay it.
I thought the point that Chris made last week or Tuesday, about the fact that the lower the number we have, the better it is for the taxpayer in the town. Was a good point. And so if we can afford to pay it now, and an obligation we're gonna have to pay anyway, moving it forward essentially lowers the burden on the taxpayer going forward. That should have to do that.
Lowers the chance that we would have to raise taxes,
Yeah,
you're saying.
why wouldn't you do that?
It makes your year-over-year tax burden closer to the same. Instead of basically making the fund balance go up a little bit more. Which is the result. And like I said, I'm happy.
We don't know that's the result. Yes, it may be past practice.
Well, I'm happy to go and take whatever number we approve. Let's say hypothetically, we all stick to 362, and in the 362 is $45,000 or, $100,000 of accelerated expenditures, whatever you want to call it. I'm happy to go and say, community, we've adopted a 3.62 budget. As a result of that, we anticipate using $100,000 of money again in the current budget that will not be unspent because we're committing it to these resources. If you would like, we will not spend that $100,000, and instead we need 4.1 next year. You can decide whether you want to move that forward and accelerate the tax rate higher, or have us, spend $100,000 on educational needs that have been approved by taxpayers in the current year anyway. It's a left pocket, right pocket thing that all boils down to how fat is the fund balance going to be on July 1st. And there are members of our Board of Selectmen and our Board of Finance who are very crystal clear on the record that the fund balance is sacrosanct and shall not be used for the purpose of offsetting the mill rate, despite the practice of other communities. So the way I see it, any dollar that goes back to the town sits in the fund balance and does not end. So to the extent that we can reduce the increase in taxation, the increase in the budget by accelerating some of our obligations, which is really what these are, then it's a net benefit to the taxpayer based on the way that the town writ large is not about municipal finance. And really what we're talking about here, to Sarah's point, is breakage from transportation that we're applying to future obligations.
When will we be done with Arabs altogether?
This is it.
This would be it right now. There are none, I mean, they arise from time to time. But the currently known ones, this will resolve them all.
And they arise for a reason, this is
No,
not,
there
it's
are-
not
there
an
are
equal thing,
No, this is not all of them, because this is only 6, there's 9.
Oh.
But I can't find, I am not, this is the last, next
Last
year.
year, right.
Next year would be the last year, so in the budget, in the 3.62 would be still a Vera payment. Because I am not comfortable saying that I can find 102,000 plus an additional 45. I just don't, I'm just not comfortable.
Yeah, the VARs were used when we were facing 5+% increases, and we were able to get the increases down a lot using the VAR.
Does that make you more comfortable, Mike, knowing that it's ultimately benefiting the taxpayer?
It's a good argument. I just, you know, the 362 to me is really a 4.1 with some accelerated payments that makes it, you know, makes it look better.
Yeah. No, but I think, but we're being clear about it, right? We're not, that's right.
Nobody's hiding the ball,
there.
why not just call it 4.1?
Because it's not, because the ultimate funding request is not 4.1.
Is there any benefit to splitting the 9 differently between the 2 years? Splitting the 9.
This is arbitrary.
Not especially, it was just about, you know, how much, when Dr. McKinnon came to me and said, what do you feel, what do you feel really, what number do you feel comfortable with? This is one that today, because by the way, it is February 9th, and we still have a number of months left in the school year. I'm comfortable saying to you, you know, I am comfortable saying we would be giving the town back 157,000. And so if you choose to do these things, you won't give, and by the way, you're not really giving it back to the town because we never really asked for it, but you would be, but you would, the overall budget request that would go to the town would not include that 157,000.
When I have extra money, I pay down my mortgage.
Yeah.
And I understand. It's just that, you know, we're facing some difficult times possibly going forward. Everyone's calling, every expert, including the World Health, the World, everyone's calling for a possible recession.
Yeah.
And I know thousands of people that are getting laid off from various companies, and some of them are my clients. And, you know, it's just a difficult time, that's all I'm saying.
But even more reason to try to keep that number low so that we can keep the tax burden low for next year.
Right, the argument that we need to keep taxes low is an argument to accelerate everything on this list.
Right.
Well, not in the current year.
Well, that's how you keep next year's budget down, is by accelerating things in the current year.
But you don't know what next year holds either.
Right, but
Even longer.
But what you're saying is, you're concerned about the near-term economic outlook. And what I hear embedded in that is, keep any tax increase low for next year. And the way to do that is to keep that number 362 as low as possible. And the way to do that is to say, I've got $175,000 from a bus that I'm not going to need. Let's use it to pay some of our obligations, to pay our mortgage down. So that we know that it's, because it's not as if the choice is between paying the mortgage down and holding the money in case I need, you know, milk and eggs later. Because that's not how the funding works. On July 1st, we got 0. You know, it's not like we got money sitting in the bank that we can just sort of hold for a rainy day.
Sounds a little like we're moving closer to a vote, but before we do, I'd like to go back to line 19 or what's above there. First help. And yeah, line 17. So what is the number we're plugging for claims? I see that, you know, I see a change number there. Well, what's the number we're plugging for claims?
You have to go back to the healthcare, you have to go back to the healthcare sheet itself on this in here and add up, it includes claims and also fees. So
it's the number that we looked at.
yeah.
So
if you go, not to that particular tab, but if you go to the tab in the current budget sheet and you click on district wide, there are 2 numbers for healthcare. One of them is for certified staff, and one of them is for non-certified staff. So this year's numbers are in green, and pulled out of that is underneath is the medical insurance pay in lieu. But so that's more of a fixed cost. But the numbers that are green for this year include both claims, and that's all.
net.
That's net.
Claims, other fees,
Claims,
minus
fees.
contribution.
And other
Yes.
payments are HSA contributions.
So, so everything in there, so everything in those lines for medical, that is, that's a net. So if you take those 2 lines and add them together for this year, the total that you have this year budgeted for medical is, if you click on, H13, and you also click on H20, and
Control
you,
click or Apple click.
and you like click it.
Hold on. There you go.
Then down at the bottom, you can see the sum of those two numbers.
2856, 516, which is what was on Jason's slide.
Yeah.
A couple meetings.
And so the total amount that you had in your healthcare fund for this year is that number that you see currently at the bottom of the screen, plus what you started the year with, which was, I believe 600,000.
619 or 691.
691.
And so our total number this year would be that.
And so your total number for healthcare this year is that number plus 691.89.
Which I hate doing. I hate calling it that.
Well, that includes what you had in your healthcare reserve, that's all the money that you have for healthcare. So next year, all the money that you have budgeted currently for healthcare is in line I-13 and line I-20, which is,
Probably 3,085,037.
and there you go.
Plus.
Plus,
800,000.
whatever you decide to put in as the reserve. So we will, based on your current claims, we anticipate that there will be money left over from this year that we did not need to expend. If you decide, as you have in the past, to take that money, that's how you started with that 691.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? During the last 5 years, how often have you transferred money from unexpended funds into the benefits reserve?
Probably 4 out of 5, if not 5 out of 5.
So 4 out of 5 times you had to take unexpended funds to put it in the health benefits reserve. And some of those additions range from anywhere from 300,000 to
I
600,000.
think from 90,000 to 600,000, yeah.
Right. So we're going to be pretty tight at the end of this year because we're taking, we know of at least 157,000 out of end of year funds to pay some of the things that are in next year's budget.
Let me work off of this line of thinking for a second. I went back to the last couple of years of health claims off the report because I was curious about what are worst and best sort of five.
Oh, I did not give you that to
Let me throw the updated. Formulas, right? The numbers on the bottom and the middle, Sarah updates.
So I took the sheet from the other night and I plugged in every month's claims going back a couple of years. And I said, what is our best and worst 5-month average so that we can try to zero in on what the range.
The last 5 months average?
No, any 5-month average.
Okay.
So what's the worst running 5 months of claims so that we can project going forward for 5 months, roughly what the high and low will be, at least historically. And the low bound is 224 and the high bound is 350.
And you looked at just the second half of the year?
I look at the whole year, but it happened to be that these numbers both came, the 350 came from the back end of the year. The 224 comes from right now, is the lowest running 5 months of the past couple of years. And so then what I did was I took the numbers off of Jason's slide, which said, you know, we have a budget of 285, we've withdrawn 952, we've encumbered 1.9, we future inputs of 215, leave us an available $2.14 million with $800,000 in the insurance fund, which leaves available for claims for the end of the year $1.9 million. If our claims on a monthly average 225, we will have a run rate of 1.125 for the rest of the year, which will leave us with $842,000 in excess of $800,000 in the claims fund. If we pattern off of the worst run, which is $350,000 per month for 5 months, we'll run into $1.75 million in claim and still have $217,000 in excess of $800,000 left over in the health plan. So the answer is probably somewhere between the two of those, which comes out to in the ballpark of $500,000 in addition to $800,000 that's sitting there. So that gives rise to a series of questions, including whether that $500,000 that is likely to exist is best spent by creating a phenomenally healthy plans fund that eliminates a majority of risk for a number of years. Or saying, in addition to Sarah's $150,000 she's comfortable saying we'll have, we now also have $500,000 we're similarly reasonably comfortable having. And what impact does that have on the conversation around saying, now I am comfortable that we can pay all of the VARIP, so we can pay all of whatever in the current year, because I know I've got $600,000 that's probably going to be available if we don't connect all the health insurance at the end of the year. So I use Jason Durbridge-Molest's presentation and the health plans to run that, which seems about right, unless I've missed something substantial there.
I think that's pretty much it.
Or
So I
if we
think,
run that worst case scenario. Let's forget that at the bottom of the worst case scenario, there was what, 250 left over or something, 200 left
But
over.
bottom of the world, if we run $350 a month for 5 months, you have a $215 left.
Okay, let's call it 200, right? Let's just hold that out to the side and not talk about it right now. And we did something else with that, and we still had 800 in the reserve going in. That's, I was talking about backstops last time. That's about a 25% backdrop on total claims. Total claims are 3,000,000, 750,000 is exactly 25%. So it's maybe a little bit more. So big backstop. We could miss claims by 25%, and still we don't have to dig into anything else. We don't have to, worry about what we have in the, at the end of the year, the surplus. We don't have to worry about going to the Board of Finance. We have like 4 backstops. We have the reserve. We have, at the end of the year, we have, surplus. We've got Sarah right here that can start to dial down spending if she sees us coming, towards a cliff. And then we have, the Board of Finance to ask for more money. We're gonna pay those claims no matter what. We have four ways to pay them. So I think asking for asking next year for any more money than we need to fund that 800 is, it's just too rich.
It's asking for more money than we need to fund the 800. I don't understand the comment.
If we predict those worst case claims, right, and then increase them by 13%, did you run that number or any of those, or maybe the middle number?
Increase by 13, you mean for what next year would look like?
Yeah.
I was just doing 5-month averages, but if you said that next year, I was saying 250 was an average, and so 250 times adding 13 is 282 a month, so you're looking at $30,000 more a month, looking at $360,000 more.
Right.
Probably. Because at 3 million, equal at 3.08 million, you're budgeting 257 a month in claims. And so that's right on that number of what the average between the highs and the lows is, 257 a month.
It's almost our 3-year average.
It's pretty much on the nose. And so you're saying, basically, if instead of being on average, claims hit that 13% projected increase, you're 360 light, basically. And now then the question is, do you say, great, I'm gonna take the 360 out of the $800,000 balance, and then you're perpetually playing this game where you're tapping the reserve?
No, but we're also we should be perpetually budgeting for a surplus at the end of the year that's more than 1%. Shouldn't we?
Why budget for that?
Just overall.
No, but I'm saying, but then, like, That to me sounds worse than the. Like, if we're buffering, that's what John was saying, is like, essentially, you take the budget you're gonna need, but then you add a little bit more just cause.
Never happened.
No, I know, but why would we do that?
It's what's been done since or at least that's where we land.
Well, we land there.
We always land,
We land there
and I'm not
because
saying it's a bad, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, say again.
We land there because we don't have a choice. We land there because we said, hey, I think it'd be nice if we bought this laptop and it's been in the budget, but I got to June and instead of this laptop, I had to buy 3 iPads for another reason, so I could never buy the laptop. You didn't go and buy the laptop because you would have gone under zero. The result is you had $50 left over. It doesn't mean that there was some success. The reality is you only land on one side of the ledger. So you're always gonna be between 0 and 99.99. You're never gonna be between 0 and 105. Absent extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah.
That's where it's a sort of a fiction to say there must be, the old canard of there must be fat on here because you haven't actually spent it all, doesn't hold up the scrutiny.
That's not what I'm saying.
You're saying,
I don't think it is,
are you saying add?
No, I'm saying that, if you do a really good job, if the administration does a really good job with the budget, there's going to be a little something left over. We shouldn't go skidding into the last day of the fiscal year with like $1 left. That would be. I don't think that sounds like a good idea.
But we have to account.
So I'm saying there's always going to be, either there should be, right, a little bit of a surplus at the end.
So we have to account for every penny across the board, line item by line item, right? And the only reason we end up with excess is because there's breakage and something. We can't ever go negative anyway, right? So we're only gonna be able to have excess. And honestly, the closer we get to the 0, I get it's scary, but that just means we predicted it really well.
Well, then, I think that's a great case for a much lower health insurance number. If that's the way you look at it.
But the health insurance is the most volatile of these things,
And
so we can't predict.
And we've got backstop after backstop to make sure that we're good. With $800,000, which is a 25% backstop, we have what we normally get at the end of the year, some sort of.
You're proposing the exact solution that you're criticizing with the barrels. You're saying, let's front load health insurance with excess funds now, so that we can underfund it next year and just pay it out of this year's funds next year.
No, I'm not saying we're gonna fund it. First of all,
That's what you're proposing.
we've always done 2 things at the end of the year, right? We either return the money to the town or we top up the health insurance or both, right? So I'm comfortable with that practice. But we're not gonna have to top up the health insurance this year. It doesn't look like that. As a matter of fact, I think we're gonna end the year, this sounds like $1 million, with $1 million extra. We've been over, I think we've been over budget.
Well, we're gonna have to top it off because it's a reserve that we have to set a number to. And that number we've already talked about being $800,000. So there's a topping off that's gonna happen.
Yeah. And there's gonna be more than enough to do that.
But we're already predicting 8% when people are saying, no, it should, I forgot the name of the company. that's
Around 13%.
Should be 13%, right? We're all saying, no, that's a little much for us. We're looking at these stats, it's probably close to 8, right?
I mean,
When you're saying go 5 because we're doing so well, but that then forces us into a scenario where we're using backstops. Right, that is a worse way of budgeting because then you're depending on, like, if you're trying to predict, you predict based on the data you have, as opposed to the data you have, then you say, okay, well, we have all these backstops, it doesn't matter if we hit it or not, we'll have these security measures anyway.
Right, would you take $500,000 that if at the end of the year, we're under by $500,000 in health insurance, which is kind of where we're projecting. Would you say right now, let's take that $500,000 and park it in the health reserve and take $500,000 out of next year's budget?
I don't think we're gonna need to do that, no.
So how much do you want to take out of next year's budget?
I'd like to take more out of next year's budget. I think
What's more?
I need the numbers on the screen to do it.
Okay.
I mean, let's look at, let's put them up on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you go to the reduction calculator?
Please.
So each point is about $30,000. That seem right?
Seems
$3 million.
Seems low. Oh, on the health
Oh,
insurance,
yeah.
yes.
Not the budget.
On the health.
Okay, so here we go. We're at 8%. There is the reduction so far. So are you saying to play around with that negative 128, which is 8%, and go lower? Like if you plugged in 7%, what would that look like?
Like if you plugged in zero, what would that look like?
It would look like 2.856516. You could just slide right over the increase number and put in 0 or.
So you're saying not reduce next year's?
He's saying flat budgeted. He's saying
Flat budgeted, knowing that we're gonna end with an 800,000
Oh, so you're saying-
reserve,
No increase.
right, knowing that we're gonna end with an $800,000 reserve plus.
But then aren't you gonna end up having to fill that reserve next year?
Right, you're setting out this perpetual cycle, and this is an opportunity to get out of
You
that.
could say that if you knew what claims were gonna be.
I don't, but
Yeah,
that,
I don't either.
but that's the thing, right? If you don't know, then you should give use the data you have.
And because we've never not needed to do it, it means we've never actually budgeted enough.
In each.
Like, it's a permanent cycle under budgeting health-wise. And last year, we under budgeted so much that we almost lost all the
So
reserve.
you're counting on,
Yeah.
on having that excess to eat into throughout the next year. So you're saying under budget health insurance, even though. No.
No, I'm saying budget less,
He's saying budget less. even
because
though
we have
know
4 backstops on the health
But
insurance.
You can
We have a
spend,
reserve, we have a 25% reserve on that health insurance.
Well, it's
The
just
800.
do it right in the,
Just
do it
start.
right in it's easier to just do it right on the sheet and watch the number change than.
Okay, fine,
because I
then just
was
give
not-
me, so.
Yeah, I was not
8%
anticipating doing that, so I don't
Okay.
have anything set up for that.
no,
So I would say you could do it in real time and anybody looking at the budget. Okay, so tell me what you are comfortable with. So when I look at your healthcare numbers and some other numbers, some from Brown and Brown. The required budget that Brown and Brown is recommending that we have is 3,642,788. That's what they are projecting that we should have for next year. So however we get to that number, from my perspective, I'd love to get to a number that's close to that. So whether you pay it this year, into next year, pay it however you want to do it.
So then, Mike, you're proposing whatever the negative number of the increase is.
So let me go to those budget lines.
So
And-
3642788 instead plug 2842788. Just
285.
Yeah,
What's the difference?
and
The difference is between
800,000.
that, so I can.
It's $228,521 total.
So make that a negative 228.
Yeah. We're,
So you'd like it to be funded.
Right.
the what does it look like question is flat funded, and mine is 228,521.
Putting in one.
Yeah. Why did nothing change?
Yeah. Doesn't make any difference. What are we talking about?
Let's zero fund it.
It's gonna connect those formulas.
Excel
again.
just
Yeah,
over.
I have to agree. Yeah, sorry.
Hold on a second.
It's $100,000. It's half-ish a point. You're gonna get 3.19 to 3.21.
You're using 8 times 3, 240,000 more in addition to the 128 to get to 0 now.
No, I'm saying that mine is 228,
Yeah.
it's flat funding insurance. And I'm projecting what that
He's saying
rolls
that
up
that's
to.
point.
And we're 362 now, that should make it about 3.2,
What's a half point overall?
a little under half a point wrong, right? Half a point is 110 or 120.
But then you're still pretty much, now you're guaranteeing that we're gonna eat into the reserve. which given last year, I would not much comfortable with.
And we don't have an anthem projection for next year yet, we just have a Brown and Brown projection. And Brown was 600K higher than Anthem last year, for what it's worth. Anthem's claim projection for current year, a year ago, was 2.738 million. We budgeted 2.85 million, 100K over Anthem, 500K under Brown and Brown. And we're on track to beat both of those. The year before, Anthem was 2.6, Brown and Brown was 3.2. I think we lost to both of those. I'm sorry, no, the 3.2 in fiscal 22 is the actual, and the Anthem number was 2.6. So Anthem missed by 600,000 in 22. We're currently ahead of Anthem for this year.
2.6. 2.66.
Thank you.
Well, so if you take, so the problem
And
with
the
the
previous
formula is
one
that we added in, we had this special education teacher subtracted twice. So if you click on, cell H 23 or 24, and you take out the total increase that you had by 228,520, which is what you're asking for, right? You're taking that out. So then your total increase is 677,212 at that time. And then if you also take out the Kubota, the Vera, the math textbooks, and then you add back in the teacher, you're looking at 2.66.
So does that mean the number was wrong? When we were looking at it?
Yeah.
This one here counted that, this here counted, I fixed it, but
So can you, so now we know this number 2.66, can you put in what we were at, the 8%?
Right, make it 128 again.
Yeah.
okay.
That's what I
can see
did.
what that looks like. Because then we're.
Oh, wait.
Well, so, well,
I didn't
I don't wanna
control
make sure.
It doesn't make any difference.
No.
This is no reason to do.
There are 58.
Twilight.
Well, no, so
How's that
what
busted
happened was, we just took out the special education teacher 3 times instead of twice. And so that's why, not in the actual budget, but in this little calculator situation. And so it drew it down more than it should have been, but I did, so right now, with everything as it is, it is at 3.8. And then if you decide that you want to do all of these things, it brings it down to 3.62. But if you just take this bottom line number, which is what you would have if you did all of this, and you subtract out your 222, your 222.
That was, you should have subtracted out 100 essentially, because we went from 128 to
220.
220.
To 220, okay.
And just 100 out on the next.
So take 100, so take 100 out.
Yeah.
So take 100 out. 'cause that-
Okay.
Healthcare reduction, number 2, basically.
Healthcare reduction number 2. So if you click on,
Scroll down.
if you click on H28, you'll be able to see the formula. And see if this is what you're wanting me to do.
Yeah, so that makes sense, because it went from 3.6 to 3.2.
So if you take out, if you
Yeah.
decide that you want to put more in,
What role did the check marks play at all?
it's whether or not
Tracking what we
they
talked
were actually just subtracted from the budget.
Yeah.
But it clearly didn't work because Dr. McKinnon and I both took out the special ed teacher. I apologize.
So Mike.
We'll do better.
You went from 3.6 to
better.
3.2.
How?
That's the extra $100,000.
With the extra 100.
That's the extra
out of health
100,000.
insurance that you were suggesting.
Instead of
Oh,
putting it,
3.6. I'm sorry, I heard 2.6.
instead of putting it there, Sarah, could we go all the way up to the top and do something like, I don't want to mess with your mom here, but something like,
I don't want to myself, but I will.
but we can always do it probably, but here's healthcare at 8%. Here's healthcare at 5%.
It's not gonna drop.
No, I wouldn't do it that way.
Yeah.
I think it's basically, this is healthcare at 8%, and I think that, so here's another way to say it. Is there anybody that wants to fund healthcare at more than 8%? Because if the answer is no, we can lock that line and then worry about further reductions to healthcare.
Fine.
Guys at home?
That's fine.
Okay.
Lock it.
Okay, it's good. It was locked. I had a check. What you
So-
So now with health insurance reduction number 2,
Yeah.
and then. Okay, so for further health insurance reduction, and then propose it at 100.
Yes. This will work perfectly in the formula.
And then we can
Yeah.
move this number up and down.
And then you can move it up and down,
Yeah.
yes.
Got it. So put it, copy the formula across, call it 100 for now, see what that does to the number. And now we actually have a sandbox so we can turn the things on and
Yes.
off there.
So make that negative.
You have to
100.
change it to 100, change it, yeah,
It's more in health insurance, minus 100.
change it to 100, yep.
Okay,
Okay,
so say it
you can drive in. 100, there you go.
All right.
That works, yeah.
Do you want it to be more than 100,000?
You can go negative year over year on health claims.
Or if you,
I mean, we're
Reduce it.
guaranteed.
Well, let's talk about 100 first. I mean, Mike, are you comfortable with 100? Is that a good starting place to talk?
It is a good starting place to talk.
What would a 5% increase be rather than an 8%? So it's not.
Why'd you do 200,000?
I didn't do it.
Did Sarah make that a
Yeah,
negative 100?
who's running this thing?
But, you know, we've got this little thing, I can actually go into.
How do you can see that?
He's not telling you he's logged into Sarah.
I'm
no,
using,
no.
using your secret power against you.
But Mike, we're essentially guaranteeing at this point that that 100,000 is gonna end up coming out of the reserve.
That's.
Because we're underestimating the insurance at 8% as it is.
I could easily say that we're guaranteeing it's not, that claims are gonna be good. We're on a good trend.
Well,
It's the
let's,
same,
let's
that
look at
guarantees
this
carry
slightly,
the same way.
let's look at this slightly differently. If we flat fund, you're putting aside $2.85 million for next year. That's gonna be an increase, you know, budget to budget is 0, but what is the increase projected actual to budget? And right now, we are looking, and if we assume that we run, so what's the current year to date average is 226. So the first half of the year is 226, let's assume the back half of the year is 250, just to be conservative, and the whole year shakes out at 235 or 240. So what's 240 times 12?
You could even, you could negatively fund it if you want, if you're gonna take enough money from this year and put it in to next year. We did that in last year.
So
So, I mean, that's a.
And it sounds like you might have it to do
If
it.
you wanna do that, you can.
if we go the whole year at an average of 240, it's $2.88 million, which is exactly what budgeted. Basically, like we hit the number on the nose. So if we flat funded, it's assuming that our current year, which is coming at which we are saying is at 240, will not go up a dime next year. Which would make it the lowest average going back for how many years? Because we finished this year at 2.8, The year before, we finished at 3.3, 3.4, 2.7, 2.4. You have to go back to 2019, basically, to be in this ballpark. And that's why when Chirag says, you're basically guaranteed to hit the tap reserve.
And how that, I'm not viewing that as bad to tap the reserve for a little bit. We have a 25% backstop in the reserve.
And I'd like to see before the 2017, because 19, 20, 21 still includes COVID, and there's a lot of COVID related expenses perhaps in there.
Well, 1920, we actually benefited when everything shut down, because if you look in the spring, claims plummeted because we didn't have anybody doing anything optional.
And anything further back, the healthcare cost increases year over year, so
Right.
it wouldn't matter.
So,
I have a hard time planning to dip into the reserve. I mean, it ideally, we should never have to touch it. It should be there in case of, extenuating circumstances. So I have a hard time planning to dip in.
I agree.
I see this as an opportunity to get out of the use your reserve every year business.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
that should be our goal.
And to say, we have this opportunity to set a legitimate reserve that's going to sit there as a legitimate reserve.
Yeah, I mean, if we look back to last year, I mean, the entire district had to halt spending, and it was like panic mode all year long to make sure we could pay our claims at the end of the year. I mean, why would we want to put ourselves in a situation like that again?
I think we were in panic mode there for a different reason. It wasn't necessarily health.
I have a hard time not planning for increases in healthcare costs and everything like that. I do think we have to build something in for that.
Is that if you budgeted at a 5% increase as opposed to an 8% increase or a 0% increase, you could theoretically prepay some of the items that we talked about at the end of this year and keep the reserve where it is. And guess what happens to the money that we don't use in health insurance? Goes back to the town. So I feel like we can fund it at 5%, which keeps next year at a safe level, and see how the end of this year plays out. And if it plays out the way we think it's going to play out, I think that's good news. And then at that point, you can return money unexpended from health insurance funds. Because then your reserve is where your reserve is.
Let's look at 5 then.
So we've looked at 8%, we've looked at 0. What would 5 be?
So 5 would be a total increase, and I actually did it on the actual sheets for certified medical, so if you look at the district-wide columns, you'll see that the change there is 5%. So if you go back to if you go back to the actual calculation
Go
sheets,
now, yeah.
this is where you'll see the increase of 5% would be a total of,
So 130, 142.
so 142, 825 approximately, that's 5%. And so what that does to your overall budget is it brings it down to 3.44 without anything else, without the 157,000 reduction.
So what would this
So-
reduction be? It wouldn't be 100,000.
No.
What would that be?
It would be
16.
50?
yes,
100,000 represents 8%.
She said it was 3.44, something 3.6.
100 represents 8.
Because right, it's going from 8 to 0 if you take out 100.
The 100 represented a flat budget. So the 128, I thought represented 8 up above.
so like about 38, right?
All right. Minus 3.46.
You were at 3.44.
Yeah, right. So at a 5% increase budgeted for health insurance and all of those things, including funding for special education teacher or the FTE, the sixth section of kindergarten, you're at 3.46.
If it makes my count. I am more comfortable with.
Oh my God, that just warms my heart.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with this.
Negative, if we have to dip in to make it work at 38,000 with $800,000, I'm much more.
I don't think we're gonna have to dip, because we're gonna have something this year.
Do you know something? You
I'm an optimist, Gerard.
You've been here longer than anyone.
I'm an optimist, in spite of being here.
Mike's gonna be the new pharmacy benefit manager.
So I'm comfortable, Laura. What about, Stephanie?
Sarah, can you make those bottom couple green, like indicating that they are staying in, right? So you got a couple of things checked off in D. So we're taking out, right? So we're taking out 24 and 23. I'm getting mixed up on the colors, just trying to see what's out so that to get to the 3-4.
We should
And I'm gonna- and I'll-
probably switch to your main spreadsheet.
I'm gonna take a moment and switch to the main spreadsheet and take these things out, so,
And can I just ask a question, Sarah, before you do that?
yep.
So, the further health reduction is 38, which is in F29, right? And the initial reduction was 128, which is in F18. If you added the reduction together, that's 166,560. So if we just kept it at one line, and it's basically going from 12.5% to 5%, then wouldn't the reduction total 166,560? Could you do it that way in your spreadsheet without messing up your formula? I guess that's my question. Right, so you're 3.46 right now. Just gonna write this down.
Sorry, I was just gonna do it in the actual budget.
We go 166,560.
You're on negative.
Negative. Go down here and say 0. Yep. And it's a.
Your problem was this wasn't working before. That's
No,
why
if I had to, those numbers at the top were not from the other
that
day,
Didn't quite work.
did not, right, but I just took out now. That's
Right,
close.
'cause we're at
Now I'm gonna
3.46.
add in. Europe. So I'm gonna do it in the actual spreadsheet.
Because of what I
Yeah.
just did not work.
No.
Just, it's messy having one reduction and another
I'm
reduction.
sorry.
Combine them.
Do you have any of those?
It's almost like we should take everything that's agreed to, roll it up into one and say, agreed to, and then start working below it, but the things that we're still planning.
That was kind of the point of check.
But it is where we're at this point. We're set.
Let's see.
We're talking about 3.4.
Yes.
I don't know if they're, I think that's where we are, right?
I don't think there's anything left.
Yeah,
There's one bigger.
guys at home, are you guys comfortable that we've agreed to all these things, items?
I'm comfortable.
Yep.
I'm comfortable. Honestly, my greatest fear is that we present a very thoughtful budget and Board of Finance is going to tell us cut another amount,
I'll talk about
Yeah, those are fighting words now.
Well, we did
Don't
this
know
last
until you
year.
try.
Yeah, but we presented a very thoughtful budget last year and they still forced us back to the table to cut more.
We didn't
Yeah.
have to make any of those cuts, though. I think that it's part of their job to put pressure on the budget, and if we feel comfortable with it, I think we should just stand by our budget.
Yeah, we did it and I wasn't comfortable with everything we cut. And so I'd like to kind of stand by it,
Well, that's what I'm saying. We made additional cuts last year, and I don't know that we needed to.
Well,
Let's not predict the future, let's focus on the present and try to figure out what we're comfortable with. Yeah.
well, no, I'm comfortable with it. I'm anticipating that, Chris, and I think it's very possible. And
And to put a point on what you're saying.
it seems to be their way of working. And so it bothers me.
We need to hold our ground this year.
Yep, I think so. And I'm comfortable with it. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm comfortable with it if we're holding our ground. If we're not going to hold our ground, then leave it higher. And then when they want us to cut, this is what we present. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So this is this. You get to 3.46 by assuming we are in current year funding the math curriculum, 6 of the voluntary retirement benefits. And getting our health insurance to at least 800K on June 30th.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there's probably some additional money for a to be determined conversation, but that's the in current year. Because you might have a conversation in June about paying some of these verbs in current year too.
Oh, are we ready for a vote?
We're calculating.
Just staring at them. Okay, so, Dr. McKinney, if you look at district-wide,
Yep.
you'll see that medical is 5%,
Good, good, everyone.
okay?
K13.
Okay, if you
Page nine.
click on PPS and you click on special education teachers, you'll see that I added in, and this is where I'm a little bit unclear about the special education teacher. I'm adding in,
Hold on, I can't.
You're
I
taking
add-
out
I
the
added
IDEA
in-
credit.
I added in 68,399, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
And
But
take it
it's
up.
not grant funded.
not grant funded.
That is correct.
Well, wouldn't it make more sense to just remove, because I think above, you have it as grant funded before, right? So just take out the grant.
I had it as a notation as grant funded when it was
No,
0.
no, above here, I thought, okay, never mind.
There were 2 in there previously, that's how the,
And is there a grant offset anywhere that needs to be adjusted?
No, that is the,
Because it was in there, okay, so Sarah's already gone in and said, this is 68,000, the note said grant funded,
Okay,
that's a
these are
reversal.
different grants.
okay.
Right,
the Kubota is on the RES equipment tab. Nope. I took it off, so I'll find it. So onto facilities, I apologize. So that's gonna be under facilities. And so if you click on facilities and projects, I took out the Kubota.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go
If you click on curriculum and instruction, and you click on professional texts, you'll see that I took out the 45 for math,
right there.
okay? And then,
Making sure.
well, no,
Can you lock him out?
and now if you go to our, the Vera is gonna be under,
It's in a few places, right?
it is, but it's gonna be under Reading Elementary, and then it's going to be under certified staff, other payments. And for the Vera,
There. Yeah.
so there, we are going to pay, 51,000. So let's just double check that Vera payment right there. But I think that should be fine.
So we're increasing the 34 to 51?
No, it's going from 85 to 34.
It's going from 85 to 34. So, so I can say this, I'll make the formula so you can click on it.
And
Um,
John Reed, another one.
So that's going to 34. And am I missing anything else that you wanted to say?
3 more merit payments at John Reed, right?
There are. Back to my list. So we check out the box. Okay, so we saw the Kubota, we saw the Veric, we saw the math textbooks. We added back in the special ed, and then this was the healthcare reduction. So we all saw,
Yeah, we're just checking the last of the merit payments. So we did 3 at 51,000, there should be 3 more at 45,000.
You see it?
we already took that one out, I believe.
John Reed.
John Reed.
That one
We're in
right there,
RS.
We were
45.
on our RS, we need to go to John Reed.
22 is out.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, so
John
that
Reed.
45.
so we took that part out, correct?
Okay, yep.
Okay. No pressure while you watch, we'll do this live.
I know, I would,
All right, so that should be everything. We would also, we also reduced the custodian request. So if you click on the custodian, that one, it has a link, so you can click on that, so you can see that I did that. If you wanted to. If you click on that.
well, I don't think we need to go in and like check.
No, we
This-
just solved them, I did.
This kind of calculates what those changes. were.
This right there is-
So now.
Estimate.
Yes.
Want to get our final number.
So it's 3.46, and what we need to check is the.
And
I think it's-
It is less than that. That is the reason why I did it in the live feed, because of the way that,
You
yeah,
should be looking at this sheet.
yes.
3.30.
So it's 3.37. And
Can you hit refresh?
Yeah.
And there we go.
2.97, okay.
Now I'm worried.
Yeah, we should-
Feels like something's off.
Yeah,
How did we lose another 6/10?
Well, I want to double check. That's why I those, because we had, I want to make sure that those are all correct.
So here's what I propose we do is give Sarah 5 or 10 minutes to figure this out.
I agree.
I'd also like to address formally, items in our capital plan that we want to make formal requests for funding for.
Yeah, that's what
So why don't we talk about that for municipal Sarah crunches numbers?
Just to make sure.
So in the capital plan that we approved and was presented to the long range financial planning committee for the town, to request in fiscal year 23, the current year, we have a request for replacement of the alarm panel in this building and the elevator at the elementary school. We have estimated $65,000 for the alarm panel and $150,000 for the elevator replacement. I haven't spoken to anybody on the committee since we adopted this. Mike, you have no reason to believe that those numbers have changed or materially low or incorrect.
I know there was a quote on the alarm panel. I don't know how recent. 150 sounds like a plug. Like,
But.
like you're up. No. He's new.
So. That's the next sheet.
There are no open questions for administration. Yeah.
What else, Chris?
So those are the two numbers, and then the other thing is that we were gonna make a request in current fiscal year for the phase one of the ed spec work. But we don't have a number yet, so we're kind of in a limbo range, and I've given notice to the ARPA folks several times that we're trying to get them a number. I'm not sure it's gonna hit that work stream, given the calendar.
The ARPA work stream?
Right, because they're moving to recommendations a week from now to go back to the selectmen. And frankly, the list from the selectmen is longer than the amount of money that's left, so. That begets the next question, which is, will we have a reasonable number to bring forward to Board of Finance for the March budget cycle, basically, to put it into the regular municipal financing work stream?
So you have all of the design, didn't they just have a meeting which would start design, and then from design, you have to propose, get approvals, you know, that we like the design, and then price it?
I
It's
think
a lot of work.
I think what we're probably looking at is a conversation around how quickly can we get a sort of targeted agreed upon budget to then request funding for, as opposed to, we're gonna replace these 3 light bulbs, they're $42. You know, we're going to spend X dollars to retrofit this room, the same way that the town is proposing, I think it's $80,000 for HVAC or AV upgrades in town hall. That's not based on anything except looking around and saying, I think this is what it's gonna cost.
And who would generate the budget?
I think it would be a collaboration with the Tecton consultants, the building level teams, and ultimately administration, and then we end up having a conversation about it. So, Mike, you find any numbers?
Yeah. And so you're trying to get a third number here, alarm, elevator.
It's alarm and elevator for sure, because that's already been put into the pipeline. The question is gonna be, at what point in time we have that ed spec number and whether it slots in for a May referendum or not.
And you said the deadline to submit, to get it for the May referendum is somewhere in March.
I think the drop dead is somewhere in April probably, but as a practical matter, it would be helpful to everybody involved probably to have it in advance of the budget hearing in May, March. This is what we're talking about, right now, this is recess, or we? No, this is filibuster until Mike has numbers.
No,
Oh, you said it to me just now, okay.
Dr. Sipin, we're talking about when we could possibly have a number, a budget number for the ed spec work.
And I don't have an update on them. I met with their team at the end of last week. Was it end of last week? Yes, the end of last week. And we've done our preliminary walkthrough of both buildings. The building administration identified a committee, and they're essentially trying to put together all their input to come up with some initial ideas. So I don't have that. I don't have the timeline yet. I suspect we could have a number within the next 4 weeks. A very, very rough preliminary number.
I think the goal should be when we convene in March, if we could have that rough number, we can talk about what we want to bring forward.
Like March 7th, right?
So I sent you the number for the alarm.
Yeah,
That's good through the end of the summer, so
that's a good number.
That's a
Yeah.
firm number for everything that we talked about. And then I have elevator guys lined up for break.
Over which break? Oh, in February?
February break.
Okay.
Come and give me numbers to them, and then we have to decide as a committee whether we can just do it with one of the elevator companies, or whether we're gonna need either to use the program or to have a contract if there's collateral stuff
Right.
that's involved in it,
But you'll have
haven't
a,
gotten there yet, but I'll have
I
it.
think you'll have it
for March 7th.
before March 7th.
Yeah,
Okay, So why don't we act on the alarm panel now, and if we're gonna talk about spec in a month, we can talk about the elevator in more detail in a month, otherwise we're just gonna stick in a number.
Yeah.
So the number that Mike has that's good for the end of the year is 62,636.89, which is right in line with the capital plan number of 65,000.
Sixty-five.
I would keep it 65 because, you know, it's a nice round number. So I'd look for a motion to,
Just kind of put this on the, oh, you know, well,
so I'd look for a motion to formally request a capital allocation of $65,000 for replacement of the alarm panel at John Reed Middle School.
I make that motion.
Mike, is there a second? Sherrod? Any discussion? Anybody at home? If
Go for
there's-
it.
So come again, John?
Nothing.
Okay, thank you. He said nothing. All right, so John Belfato stepped out. We're gonna give him a minute before we call the question on that, but I think we will plan in March 7th to talk about elevators and Tecton. And I will signal that expectation back to the Board of Finance if they're curious. We're also adopting the budget tonight. We're settled on a budget in this meeting for a number of years consecutively, and then it slid into March for a number of years, and now, you know, back on track. Track being relevant. That's-
Good job.
I think that the Google Sheet model makes things infinitely easier
Yeah.
to rely on and to work through. I mean, going back, we
Many
had
years of
working
holding
spread,
the calculator.
spreadsheets and
business
whiteboards
service.
and oops, I forgot to take this out and technical corrections later, yeah. So. I mean, there was a budget presentation one year where we had to build a slide in the presentation that says, oh, by the way, we actually have $100,000 unaccounted for in this budget that we, you know, took out but didn't take out. But- So, John, we've been talking about the capital needs of the district and what we're gonna do with that. Mike is gonna have an elevator number for us for our next meeting. Tecton, we hope to have a number broadly from them for next meeting to the ed specs, but we have a firm number on the alarm panel of $62,000 and change, and there's a motion on the floor to formally request $65,000 in capital funding for the alarm replacement. So if there's no further discussion, we'll call the roll, starting with those online. John,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
Steph,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Sherrod.
Yes.
I vote yes, the motion carries 7-0. All right. Have we burned enough time, Sarah, or do you need more?
So if we look at our fix the calculation sheet, I do believe that I still have to fix the special education teachers and the other. But if we take a look at this and we do some, I believe that the calculations are not correct for our healthcare. So that you can see that at, so this is the proposed budget change for healthcare. Would be, we're taking off that amount from our initial proposed. I think this is looking, so this sheet, if you leave this up here for a moment
This sheet.
and you take a look at it, I think this one looks okay. Now I just need to change it in the other sheets to make sure that we're good in the actual budget sheets themselves.
Okay. So, okay, this is the increase, dollar increase, percent increase overall.
Why is that different than that?
And I want to put this back here,
Because you're adding stuff there.
because we added that down at the bottom. I put the two verbs together so you can see them.
Because we added the teacher, maybe?
And this is where you added the teacher down at the bottom.
Can you freeze column one? Of row one, sorry. And I'm just gonna slide down.
There's 2.3.
707 versus 760. It's $53,000 difference. Between the bottom and the top.
You want to freeze it here?
The first row.
No, that doesn't, no, I'm sorry, that's not what I want. This is about healthcare.
I wouldn't mind if we need to, just to be sure. I'm gonna take 10 more minutes or.
Right, take more time.
I'm here.
Right, I'd rather take 10 minutes now than come back next week.
Yeah, just only do 10 more minutes. You can get that.
It's 8:58. Why don't we, stand in recess until 10 after 9? I am, muting the room and we'll, come back at 10 after 9.
Okay.
All right, it is 9:10. We are back in session. We will call back up the budget sheet, and Ms. Grafani, you have the floor to explain your work.
Okay, great. So when we did the reduction calculation sheet, some of those numbers are slightly rounded. And so in the actual budget itself, so that brings you to 3.20. I went through and took out the actual, did the actual calculations in the budget sheets. So when you click on the Reading budget planning, you'll see a percent increase of 3.26 with a total change of 775, 770. And that reflects all of the changes that you requested throughout the budget. So your total increase is 3.26. Your proposed budget is 24,569,528.
Okay, put that out there, all right.
And so that confirms all of those reductions that were just on the screen.
All of those reductions that were just on the screen.
And the addition of the special ed, or removal of the ADA grant.
IDEA. And reduction is really changes. It's fine.
You got proposed change and increase.
Just go back to the reductions calculations tab for a moment.
Yeah, I think you've taken out the data. Have you?
I took, so the numbers are slightly rounded, and so there's a total. They're just like, as an example, the Komodo at 16,000 is a slightly different number, which changes the percentage a little tiny bit, just because it's rounded up.
I'm looking at this mainly to make sure I understand what was pulled back out.
Yes,
The actual number is on a different page. We should ignore the numbers at the bottom here as being estimates.
Looking at column E.
Right.
those are all of the things, and what's in column F is, you know, because we had actual quotes for things, when I took out or added in numbers, those were the actuals for different particular things. So that changed it changes it slightly.
Yes, John.
So if you were to look through, and I could link so if you at home go to the budget that's populated, that you can see that is the Board of Ed view, you can click through that, or we can go through all those lines too.
I'm ready for that published view,
Yep,
which is 20.
hit refresh.
Hey.
There we go.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go through it line by line, but we trust.
Unless there are any other questions, anybody want to make a motion? John, sorry,
So make the motion for on budget.
so what budget?
Yeah, say the whole-
You're gonna say,
I propose, or I mean,
motion to adopt a
We can
budget
do it.
for a year of blank, an increase of blank.
Like to meet this not rounded, hold on.
Laura, did you want to do it?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll make a motion to adopt the Reading School District's 2023-2024 operating budget of $24,569,528, which is an increase of 3.26%.
Thank you. John, you want to second that? All right. Any discussion on the motion? Okay. Hearing none, we'll call the roll starting remotely again. Mr. Shanahan.
Yes.
I heard that as a yes. Laura,
Yes.
Steph,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Sherrod,
Yes.
I'll vote yes. The motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Thank you, everybody, for your work getting this across the line at this stage. We'll pick up the capital budgeting issues again in March with other additional business. We'll move the budget forwards to the Board of Finance for their public hearing, which is around March 20th. I don't have the date in front of me. My understanding is that will be in Burton, at the community center. There being no further business of the board at this time, we'll look for a motion to adjourn. Mike, second Shabag, any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 9:16 PM. Thank you, everybody.